Hello YouTube and welcome back to World of Warships with Wadres once again, and today's video is going to be continuing the Russian tech line review, and this will be focused on the Tier 7 Russian battleship, the Izmail. Now, one of the things that I do feel the need to say outright about the Izmail is that her armor profile is nice and strong, just like most of the other Russian battleships. However, she is also where you start to see some minor problems with the Russian tech line as a whole, or at least for a couple of ships at least. And primarily it's because she and her successor, the Synop, have secondary batteries with these random little cutouts. And, well, personally, I can't see any real reason for the cutouts except that they are there purely to offer nice flat surfaces for armor-piercing shells to penetrate on a moderately angled ship. I can definitely tell you that there have been a number of circumstances where running around in this ship, I have received penetrations in those sections from angles that in any other ship relative to their course, their angling, would have been perfectly fine, just to ricochet shells. And yet, the Izmail, if enemy shells find those little secondary battery bays, she will eat lots of penetrating damage very quickly from a wide array of targets. So that is just one of those things that you are going to kind of need to keep in the back of your mind working with both her and the Synop, because the Synop also has those random stupid little cutout things that really just don't make an incredible amount of sense. And that salva that I just took right there is actually a case in point. I didn't eat an incredible amount of penetrating damage, but I ate enough to hurt. And if you had noticed, where most of those shells landed was along the side of the ship, around the armor belt, but also there were a couple of shells that just drifted straight into those cutouts and just did a substantial amount of damage. The salvo that I took just recently, where that actually came in, was some of the forward-facing main secondary battery casemates that are giving a nice flat face to the front of the ship. And yeah, so that's, yeah, it hurts when you're taking things in the wrong direction to not put too fine a point on it in this ship. And that comes to one of the things that I was actually meaning to point out in regards to both the Izmail and the Synop, as I already have done, is the simple fact that the only way you can really mitigate the vast majority of damage that this ship will take is to be basically perfectly bow or stern on to any target that you're going to be facing. The Izmail and the Synop, because of these cutouts, are basically going to be the ultimate bow tankers, or the extremist bow tankers, because the only way they are really going to be able to mitigate anything fired at them at all from AP, provided shells don't just harmlessly ricochet off of their belt armor, or plunge randomly into the little cutouts, is by being 100% bow to the target. And part of why I see this as being problematic from a functional standpoint, at least the Izmail at least, is because the Izmail only has one bow-facing turret, so she can only get 1/4 of her firepower to any target that she is actually pointed directly at. To get any of her turrets to actually be able to face a target otherwise, she really has to show a lot more side than I've come to feel comfortable with in this ship. Now, at close ranges, it may not be quite such a big at long ranges, it may not be quite such a big deal, because at that point, dispersion starts taking over, so it's not going to be as easy for enemies to hit those areas with, like, pinpoint accuracy. But in close range combat, the only time you want to be showing your broadside to an enemy is if you are passing them by and blasting them at point-blank range, and you are in the middle of a turn to make sure that once they get their guns around on you, they are staring at your stern. And at that point, being stern on. Because otherwise, if they can get a look at any of those flat surfaces, even just remotely, they will hurt you. They will drill you for a substantial amount of damage, and it really is an awkward setup, if I do say so. I mean, the situation that I'm in right here, I'm eating a shit ton of damage. Granted, I'm also a little bit more broadside to this Monarch than I wanted to be. But even so, where some of those shells were hitting was, again, smack into those secondary battery cutouts, where there's really no way to keep those from just absorbing more damage than anybody should ever really be comfortable with, as far as I'm concerned. All of this having been said, the few things that I can say about the Izmail is that as long as you do realize her armor limitations in that respect, she is reasonably comfortable within the 15 to 8 kilometer engagement range. Anything shorter range, you want to be purely bow on until you are passing them by for a absolute perfect broadside as you're passing them by at point-blank range. But otherwise, I mean, she does at least function very well, as long as, again, you are aware of how her armor, how her overall layout actually affects how she receives damage. In other ways, I will say, though, that her 17-kilometer main battery range does tend to push her into the danger zone rather frequently for some of the more accurate battleships. I mean, Queen Elizabeth, Warspite, those are some very accurate ships. I mean, even the Monarch isn't exactly inaccurate as far as I'm concerned. So there is that one issue to kind of have in regards to just engaging targets, is if you have something that can routinely put shells on target with accuracy, you do want to not show really any side at all. Now, granted, that was just an unlucky hit overall. I think that actually went straight through my stern plating. But I think I've kind of made my point, is as if they can hit these cutouts at all with any accuracy, you really want to not show them too much of those cutouts at all, because those are going to be places where this ship absorbs damage like you would not believe. Now, at Tier 6, I do not believe she can see down into the Tier 4 bracket. However, she will still be matched with Tier 5s, in which case she actually does have the benefit of finally being able to outrange a couple of things, if only slightly. Particularly the Pieter Veliki, or PV, as I was calling it in my previous video, the Iron Duke at 16.8 kilometers, and the Koenig at 16.5. As far as her contemporaries, however, yeah, she's kind of outranged by every single one of them. The Fuso being the most extreme at 21.8 kilometers, and the closest to her being the Bayern at 17.7. As far as being up-tiered, even the Synop outranges her at 17.4 kilometers, so don't expect, if you end up in a tier 7 to 8. If you end up bottom tier in any match, you're basically just going to be taking fire from everything. That being said, she is reasonably quick with a 28.5 surface speed. The only ships that are really faster than her within her engagement bracket are the the Congo at 30 knots, the Normandy actually at 29.5 knots, and then you do have a couple of tier 8s and 9s, specifically, well, a good handful of the tier 8s, the Amagi, the Bismarck, and the Richelieu, as well as the Vladivostok and the Monarch, but primarily just the Gneisenau at tier 7, and her contemporary bracket is capable of actually outrunning her. So as long as you can get enemy ships within range, for the most part you can actually chase them down, or at least keep pace with them to keep them at a comfortable range. This also applies for if you are kiting away, but in the sense that you can outrun them for a little bit, turn in, take a shot, and then turn back out to continue running, and the chances are you will still gain distance regardless, so long as you are careful about your timing and everything therein. That having been said, what with those cutouts being so egregious damage magnets, the simple fact that you have to really be bow or stern on to properly, fully mitigate any damage that comes in on this ship and her successor, the Synop, is the simple fact that because she has to travel so far to actually get the vast majority of her armament on target, she does invest a lot of time into turning to get any shots off. So you really have to be careful with your timing as far as when you decide to turn out and turning back in. And your rudder shift is, well, standard battleship in that it is a slow rudder shift. So just you have to be careful with this ship because, again, she will just eat damage left and right if you use her even just slightly wrong. She is very demanding in that respect. So that's this is definitely not going to be a beginner ship for your mid-tiers. She's definitely a ship that is going to demand a lot more from players, and I think newer players especially will find much more benefit from a ship like the Gneisenau or one of the American or one of the other lines rather than this damage sponge, if I do say so. Now, something else that kind of contributes to me calling this ship a damage sponge is actually going to be in the second match that I'm showing you here. And it is going to be at the hands of the Cleveland that just popped up. Let's just say that my life is actually going to be rather miserable for the next couple of minutes because of that Cleveland specifically. And, well, most of you can probably imagine why at this point. First off, the Cleveland is notably no slouch for its rate of fire, but also the simple fact that this ship does not exactly have the strongest deck armor. So, and this is one of the problems that is notably inherent to most of the Russian battleships as well. They just tend to have weaker deck armor overall. So any high explosive shells that hit their decks at all is going to do a substantial amount of actual penetration damage. In that regard, I am also referring not just to heavy cruisers, I'm actually talking about the light cruisers as well. Because even though there are still some zones where light cruiser shells can shatter easily against your armor and not really do much of anything, there is still fire, and a light cruiser with, say, IFHE is also still more than capable of just punching right through your deck armor and doing a substantial amount of damage. On top of the fact that this ship, for whatever reason, catches fire like it seems to catch fire like it is absolutely nobody's business. I mean, this Cleveland has me burning in 2 locations. In fact, its first salvo, its first hit, actually had me burning in 2 locations that I had to really consider whether or not to put out with my limited charges of damage control. And it's already got me burning in 3 places again. And I'm going to be burning for basically, well, actually I don't have to be burning for full duration, and I do burn my damage control yet again because there's just too many fires going on in too rapid a succession. But the simple fact remains that I really had to wait and think about whether or not I actually wanted to use that damage control because I do have so few charges. And the problem is, the Cleveland forced me into a situation where I had to use the damage control or it was basically just going to burn me down completely. But as you can see, in a very short period of time, I think that was only like 2 minutes that I was actually in the Cleveland's zone of fire, it chunked me for half of my health. That damage, that was just from the Cleveland and the fires it set. Nothing else was really shooting at me at all. So, yeah, that Cleveland was a major thorn in my side for a very short period of time, to the point where I was actually wondering if I was actually going to survive the Cleveland, let alone anything else that was on the map for this match. The other thing that added a little bit to my consternation was the simple fact that despite my my initial salvo against the Cleveland, which actually did a substantial amount of damage to her, it just seemed like every other shot I took at it did nothing. It took an inordinate amount of time to kill that Cleveland. And, I mean, I was even in chat just hoping somebody else would take a shot at it, and nobody was. So, yeah, it was a major thorn in my side, and again, I was really wondering whether or not I was actually going to survive that engagement. Of course, as per my case earlier with the little secondary battery cutouts showing just a touch too much side, and if I had been as angled as I had been taking in that salvo from the North Carolina, I probably would have in any other ship, I probably would not have taken anywhere near as much damage. But because I was in the Izmail and those shells slipped straight into a couple of those cutouts, I took almost 10,000 damage from the North Carolina when in any other ship, that angle would have been absolutely no problem. Fortunately, because I did end up behind an island, the North Carolina was forced to give its attention to the the friendly Cleveland, and I was able to get into a close enough position to finish it off. Also, thank you to Torps from our friendly destroyer. Overall, again, I do believe that this ship does have potential in the right hands, but she is just going to be very demanding, and I don't think newer players especially are going to understand quite everything that they need to do to handle her properly and mitigate damage reasonably well. The first match that you all saw from this ship, I mean, that was a phenomenal battle, and the only reason it was even half as good as it was because I understood exactly what I needed to do with this ship to try and get her to work out for me, and even then, I still suffered quite dramatically from even just small mistakes in angling, where any other ship, that some of those angles would have been absolutely no problem. But because I was in the Izmail, I got punished for even just a couple of degrees off of direct bow on. Hey. Definitely going to be an interesting ship to work with to try and grind through for anybody who has only just started on the Russian line or has only made it as far as the Izmail due to the early access and is trying to grind out the Synop. And unfortunately, for those of you who are hoping that the Synop offers you better, unfortunately, the Synop is just going to be more of the same from the Izmail, as you have probably seen in my previous video regarding the Synop anyway. So yeah, just it definitely the interesting middle children, just like just about any of the other tech lines in World of Warships. I did, of course, have a third match, which took place on the map Fault Line, but just due to time constraints, I did decide to cut that match out, but I still wanted to show the battle results, which were, yeah, they were kind of lousy, to not put too fine a point on it. But I did want to kind of keep some within some reason of my 3-match showcase, and in this case, again, the 3-match showcase, the matches were just a little bit more variable than I would have liked to leave anything out. So, yeah. Unfortunately, the Fault Line map was also, or Fault Line match was also the match where I was just kind of trying to get my bearings, figure out what I needed to do with her. And in that regard, it just, there were a couple of situations where I just ended up hurting, and I was very poorly positioned in a few cases. Though there was at least one instance where I did make a good decision to turn away from a Queen Elizabeth instead of turn into her, and that actually saved me from a substantial amount of damage. But beyond that, there was really nothing to say spectacular or anything to make the match worth showing in a whole. Anyway, on that note, I hope you all have enjoyed the video. I hope you do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you have enjoyed what you've seen and found any of my information here somewhat informative. And I hope to catch you all again sometime in the future. At any rate, I hope you all take care, stay safe, and I wish you all happy hunting. Have a good one, folks.